Hey everyone, Charlie here. I hope you're all doing well. One of my biggest challenges here in Japan is finding sort of better or creative or more enjoyable ways to study Japanese while also simultaneously actually improving my Japanese skill. And if it doesn't sound difficult, let me assure you that it absolutely is. If you ever studied a language, right, be it French or Spanish or Japanese or whatever the case may be, you know that language learning is not sort of like this linearly progressive sort of process, right? And it's something I've talked about before. It goes more like, okay, well, you're really improving, then all of a sudden you feel like you've dipped down, and then it goes up, and then maybe you sort of plateau, and it doesn't feel like you're improving for a really long time. And that's sort of where I was not too long ago, sort of at this like plateauing point where I still had some issues, but I could speak about a lot of different things confidently, or at least to the point where people would understand me. And so, basically conversational level. But I wanted to get beyond just what people kind of expect from me and sort of actually get into deeper language learning and a deeper understanding and usage of the language. Now, maybe sort of conversely to what I thought, the key maybe to speaking better Japanese or more native Japanese or any language, I think, is not necessarily about the language, but about supplementary knowledge. Now, I want you to think about something real quick. In your native language, be it English or whatever, how many times do you reference things from the past, either sort of like overtly or just sort of like, calling somebody a name? Like, for example, in English, right, we'll say, oh, that guy's got a Napoleon complex, right? Things like that. And that's like a direct throwback to talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, who supposedly started all those wars and whatever because he was a short dude and had a bone to pick with the world, right? Like, that's a historical reference that sort of has seeped its way into sort of like an idiomatic phrase that we use in English. And the same can be said of Japanese. Now, I want to be very clear here. The study method that I'm going to propose to you today is not something that I came up with by myself, but it's something that when I was talking with one of my like regular drinking buddies at my izakaya, and he said basically that the problem with the way foreigners study Japanese isn't necessarily like their grammar or their vocabulary or anything like that. It's just that it always ends up sounding too almost clinical, right? In a lot of cases. Even if we end up using like local dialects or stuff like that, there's still something about it that seems very clinical. And it seems to be that there's no sort of context. We don't know how to place like certain situations in historical context or in greater context or reference back to historical events. And for him and other people at the bar who ended up agreeing with what he was saying, if, for example, I were to gain a deeper understanding of Japanese history or Japanese culture or sort of like these really sort of peculiar events that people talk about a lot, or at least reference as a way to make analogies about current events or stuff like that, then I would start to speak Japanese more like, well, a Japanese person. And of course, you can do this by simply talking about people and learning about things or buying magazines and going through and painstakingly reading them and highlighting kanji and stuff like that. But for me, one of the simplest and easiest ways I've discovered to sort of learn about history and learn about different events and stuff like that without sort of having to study is by playing a game called Karuta. Now, this is a game I play a lot with my students in English class because it's a really simple and fun way to get kids involved in new language and sort of thinking about what they're looking for and stuff like that. It's a much more active way to learn a language and sort of process information and stuff like that. And basically, the way it works is that on the table, there is like picture cards or cards with like the answer on them, so to speak, on the table. And then you pick a card from another pile of cards and you read like the hints or like the trivia information or whatever. And the first person to sort of slap down and grab the card or whatever gets that card and is awarded a point, right? Now, what's really, really interesting is that because that game is so popular, it makes it really easy for people like me who want to study sort of, how can I say, like cross-curricular studies in Japanese to find resources. Now, one of the easiest things to find is if you go to Daiso or probably another like 100 yen shop, 100 yen shop, like the equivalent of a dollar store here, you can find all sorts of Karuta sets. Now, this one is a Japanese history Karuta set. It is, I think, cards starting from like 200 AD or something like that. So going really, really far back, a lot of the things that are discussed on these cards I've never ever heard of before. And so yeah, this is really, really useful for me. Now, just to give you an example here of what these look like, and if you guys can't see these well, I'll show a close-up picture of these in the video too. But basically, here is one of those image cards I talked about, and this is the Potsdam Conference in 1945, right? I think this was May 8th, 1945, where the Allied powers, there's my Rochester accent coming out, the Allied powers got together to sort of discuss what they were going to do with Germany following World War II. And then, of course, over here, this is like some of the information. As you can see, there's like level 1, level 2, and level 3. Like more and more difficult hints. So like the level 3 one, for example, is asking who were the 3 countries involved in sort of doling out punishment for Germany. That, of course, was the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain. And so, yeah, so reading this card, you can then quickly slam down and grab the card and get yourself a point. And so like I said, this is something you can find at the dollar store. It's only 100 yen. You can find them for hiragana, you can find them for kanji, you can find them for Japanese history, and this one really interested me, so that's why I picked it up. And then, of course, you can find kind of more expensive sets. And somebody asked me the other day in the comments what the milk jug was in the background that's usually sitting back there on the shelf. This is a prefectural Karuta game. This, I think, was about 2,000 yen. It may not be worth it for you, but it's worth it for me. First, because not only is it kind of like an adult coloring set, which, you know, it's really, really cool, but it's also a fun way to learn about the prefectures and, again, add some of that sort of historical or local knowledge into your language as kind of a little bit of extra natural flair, right? So this set, which I really, really like, this is the card and the piece, the Karuta piece. So it's actually a puzzle, too, that fits together to form the archipelago of Japan. This is the Fukui card, and this is the Fukui piece. As you can see, it's shaped like a dinosaur. And of course, there's here like the main trivia thing, but if you can't understand the main trivia thing on the front, which is something I like, also on the back, it talks about how you can find dinosaur fossils here, Echizen crab. This is where almost all of Japan's eyeglasses frames are made, and then Tojimbo, one of the famous natural landmarks here in Japan and in Fukui for that matter. So, yeah, it's, like I said, it can be either a really, really cheap way to study or a more expensive way to study. But one of the things I like about this is that even though these are games that are meant to be played with like 1 or 2 people, right, or more than that, maybe 3 or 4 people, as I do in my English classes, you can play this by yourself. And, you know, you can have it be like a really leisurely thing, like where you read a card and you're like, okay, well, maybe it's this card, and just sort of go about it sort of easily, right? But what I like to do is to actually push myself to read the characters a lot faster and actually try and process the information faster, is actually use a timer and quickly grab them up and everything like that. So if you are looking for a new way to study Japanese, you're looking for a way to sort of deepen your knowledge, you can add a little more flavor to some of the things you talk about. If you're talking about the news, right, some of the things that are happening in the world right now are definitely drawing parallels to pre-World War II Japan and also pre-World War II Earth. This is a great way to sort of get some of that extra information. And as I've showed you, it doesn't have to be a terribly expensive thing. It can be really easy to find. If you're not in Japan, it's probably going to be a bit more difficult to find those 100 yen shop things, but if you have a good friend who's living over here, if you're good friends with any of the J-vloggers, for example, you might be able to talk them into like picking you up a set and sending it over or something like that. In fact, maybe that's what I do when we hit 300 videos on this channel, is a Karuta giveaway. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about this study method down in the comments below. Have you done anything similar to this? What are some of the other non-textbook related ways that you improve one of the foreign languages that you're trying to study? This is one of the most fascinating things for me, is like finding out how people study languages and what they do to make themselves better, because linguistics is a really fascinating thing. But anyway, please like and share this video if you did in fact like it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Cheers.